So with that, I realize I'm rushing a little bit, but I want to get to Q&A, and I've set up some of these questions from our side, but I see that there have been many good questions coming in from the audience, and perhaps it would be best if we start with a few of those. And so, David, I'm going to ask you a quick 2 questions about the nature of Locust, just so that we can make sure everyone's informed out there. The first question is, I'll do 2 questions in one to you, David. Do desert locusts have a natural predator? If yes, can we not just think about a biological control? And then the second question is, what can farmers do to protect themselves against desert locusts? Is there anything to prevent locusts from coming, or once there, tackle them once they've arrived? Sorry, David, you're on mute.
Thank you. There are many things which eat locusts. Particularly promising is a fungus called Metarhizium, which is specific for the locust, and that actually is now developed into a commercial tool where you could then spray it. And the benefit is less pesticides, less off-target effects, and also it tends to propagate itself, just like COVID propagates itself in our societies. We could see the propagation of the Metarhizium fungus. So we spray it, and then the locusts carry it, and as they come together, so that's beneficial. More broadly, of course, as these move in, lots of animals eat them. But the problem is that if we spray them, then we have compounding effects with the pesticides. But the greatest potential is this biocontrol agent, and we should use it more. That's really critical. The second question was what, John? Remind me.
The second question was, what can farmers do to protect themselves against desert locusts?
So unfortunately, very little. A lot of activity. They go out and they try to bang, make noise, but you really don't shift them on. Oftentimes you break them up. So if you really do have a large swarm coming, there's very little you can do. Obviously, what you could do in advance is plant tubers like cassava, which is just generally a good thing to plant in the face of climate change, because even if the foliage has been removed by the locust, the tubers will regrow. You'll still have foliage coming back, but generally, no, there's nothing they can do.
Thanks, David. I'm just going to carry on asking you questions from the audience, because there's quite a few good ones. Please do keep them coming. If there are any more, I will call on you. First question to you, David, again. Are you also monitoring what is going on in the neighboring countries? Uganda is where I am based. So do you have any news about Uganda? And then a second question I'll ask after this. It's about mapping. It's a separate topic. So go ahead.
Yeah, we do have people using it in Uganda, and early on we had records coming in. At the moment, there's no predictions. So the locusts are really moved on the wind, so there's no predictions that it's going to go in. But if they come in large numbers into Kenya, then they can go into Uganda again, and we'll have records from there. And the same thing with Tanzania. Very briefly, they went into Tanzania also. So we have to really consider, given the great changes in the meteorological conditions associated with climate change, we really have to consider that in somewhat all bets are off. They're going to move. Now, ultimately, if they move to an area like Uganda, which is more wet, then they're going to naturally decline because of picking up microbial infections. But we are certainly monitoring Uganda all the time. Thank you.
Thanks, David. There's another question here, which is a really interesting one because it's about tech, which is great. I like tech questions. We have a mapping project here in Tanzania using OpenStreetMap and Crowd to map. Could we use the satellite connection you mentioned to improve GPS accuracy? And I'm going to just quickly say one thing and then hand it over to David. My first thought on this is, and I've been the country director for Agrifin in Tanzania, so interested to know who sent in that question, because I can only see anonymous, but I would be very interested to see who did, so I could follow up with them directly. But the most important thing at the moment for digital response efforts like this, obviously there aren't locusts currently in Tanzania, but other issues is geolocations, geotagging of farms themselves. One of the issues that we have is, can we get enough field level data on those farms to be able to then match with the remote sensing and satellite efforts of others. And I think this is an interesting common theme across climate change projects in the region and pest and disease responses. But David, you may have some other ideas about these mapping platforms.
Yeah, so the question was from Janet Chapman, because she emailed separately, which is great, and I replied. So happy to hear more and engage with her and the broader team. So I'm not sure exactly the requirements, but the answer should be yes. So generally, when you're developing smartphone apps, there's some sort of exclusion by Google to prevent you connecting to the satellites, but you can work around that. And so what we've demonstrated is we can get those. Now, the great challenge is that predominantly people don't have smartphones, and it's feature phones. And so we're trying to figure out how to do this with Ishamba, who have 350,000 users of their system in Kenya, and we're trying to figure out how we can geolocate them. And oftentimes we ask the farmer automatically through SMS, what's the nearest primary school, for example, and that puts us in a few kilometers. And if you think about the cell of knowledge coming in from, say, precipitation or soil, etc., typically we get 5-kilometer radius in terms of precipitation data or forecasts. So maybe it's not really necessary to get hyper localized. And the other thing we're trying to test is if we look at all these individual farms and we look at data on precipitation, but also above ground biomass data from NASA and WOPR, FAO product and elsewhere, and Sentinel, maybe it's actually the resolution is sufficient, which would be great, because then we could automatically onboard lots and lots of farmers through USSD. So we built this USSD system to have a session. So it's probably sufficient. So I think we don't know what the answer is at the moment. We're working very actively on it. The answer to the request is absolutely we can work with you to improve the resolution and then determine what resolution is sufficient for a good enough answer for most farmers.
Thanks, David. We have only 2 minutes left, so I'm going to just ask one last question to wrap us up, and if you could respond in under a minute, I'll do the same. What have we? I'm going to ask the top question. What have we learned about leveraging digital technology in these sorts of emergency responses, and what do you see the future as for citizen reporting and other pests and diseases?
We've learned what was obvious before the crisis started, which is that digital technologies is a game-changing approach that levels the field. In the same way, people in the north or the west can use their home as a hotel now with Airbnb, or their car as a taxi. Those technologies enabled hundreds of thousands of people to change their income flow. Why would those technologies not be useful for millions of Africans to change their access to knowledge? And so it was already known before the crisis, but we've actually been able to use the Locust crisis to figure out the whole system end to end. And the example from Locust is that it's absolutely possible, and we do not need to go back to the old model. In fact, we need to expand this technology for all the threats that you've talked about, John, that are coming down the pipeline with climate change. So it's absolutely a system which has woken us up to the potential of digital technologies to rapidly change Africa in the same way M-Pesa changed the banking system in East Africa.
Thanks, David. And I guess my last thought is the majority of smallholder farmers now have phones in their hands, and it is a low-cost, quick way of reaching them with the information they need, and trustworthy information they need through government, through a myriad of other partners. And so with that, I would like to just say thank you to David for appearing today. And sorry, Elias Nure couldn't join us as well. Thank you to all of you for joining, and thank you to our partners.